The periscope sliced through the surface with deliberate precision. Commander Samuel Dealey pressed his eye against the lens, scanning the waters surrounding his vessel. What materialized before him matched exactly what his sonar operator had already relayed through the submarine's intercom. A Japanese escort frigate designated CD-22 was making its approach, accelerating straight toward their position beneath these shallow Philippine waters. The enemy captain had pinpointed their location with uncanny accuracy. This moment would define everything Dealey had become, the calculation that separated survival from destruction. For the final time, he would weigh an incoming enemy warship against his own judgment and pull the trigger on the decision that had earned him legendary status throughout the entire Pacific submarine fleet. They called him the Destroyer Killer. 3 torpedoes launched, down the throat. The gambit worked. It was the maneuver that had transformed American submarines from prey into predators, from hunted to hunter. Then the ocean erupted. 15 depth charges detonated in rapid succession, their explosions tearing through the water with catastrophic force. The USS Hake, patrolling nearby, registered every single detonation through her hull. The sound told the story. USS Harder, hull number SS-25V7, and her crew of 79 men vanished from existence, but that disappearance was not the end of the story. It was the culmination. It represented something far larger, the final chapter of a tactical revolution that had begun just 14 months earlier, when one submarine commander decided the rulebook about avoiding Japanese destroyers had been written by men who never had to face what he was about to face. Understanding how Samuel Dealey rewrote American submarine doctrine requires stepping back to something almost unimaginable. The story doesn't begin with heroics or triumphant moments. It begins with failure, with machines breaking down, and with an entire naval culture that had trained submariners for 2 decades to be observers rather than fighters. Before Pearl Harbor, the assumptions about what submarines should do proved catastrophically wrong when the Japanese attacked. In 1930, when Ensign Samuel Dealey graduated from the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, submarine doctrine throughout the Navy was built on a foundation of extreme caution. Everything emphasized preservation over aggression. Pre-war thinking dictated that submarines existed primarily to gather intelligence and scout for the surface fleet. They would strike large warships when ordered, but merchant vessels were secondary concerns, constrained by prize rules established in the London Naval Treaty. During peacetime drills, submarine commanders gained recognition for keeping their boats in pristine condition and avoiding detection, not for bold tactical thinking or innovation. Night exercises were prohibited entirely. If a referee spotted a periscope breaking the surface during exercises, the commanding officer faced immediate removal. Young submarine officers absorbed the same message over and over: hide, observe, survive. Nothing else mattered. Attack tactics stressed firing from maximum distance while submerged, deliberately sacrificing success rates to reduce risk. Caution was the governing principle. Risk was institutionalized as failure. Dealey embodied this culture during his early years. Born September 13, 1906 in Dallas, Texas, he graduated from Annapolis in June 1930 and served aboard the battleship USS Nevada before requesting transfer to submarine school in New London, Connecticut in 1934. His first commanding officer noted he was quiet, not flashy. That temperament fit perfectly with the submarine service of that era. He cycled through several submarines including S-34, S-24, Porpoise, and Bass without drawing particular attention or distinction. In spring 1940, he temporarily left submarine service to become executive officer aboard the destroyer USS Reuben James under Captain H.L. Edwards, a man everyone called Tex, someone Dealey had known since their Annapolis days. The destroyer conducted neutrality patrols in the Gulf of Mexico, working alongside British warships to intercept German U-boats attempting to reach the Atlantic. Then October 31, 1941 arrived. A German U-boat struck the Reuben James without warning, sending her to the bottom. Tex Edwards died. 115 men from the crew of 160 perished. The loss devastated Dealey. When Japanese forces struck Pearl Harbor just 5 weeks later, his entire worldview crystallized. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. He requested immediate transfer back to Submarine Command and received USS O-20, an aging test submarine used for experimental purposes. From that point forward, he drove himself and his crew with relentless intensity, preparing for combat operations with an urgency that bordered on obsession. After Pearl Harbor, submarine commanders in the Pacific grasped a brutal truth. The peaceful doctrine of caution was now an invitation to failure. Within hours of the attack, Navy headquarters transmitted orders authorizing unrestricted warfare against all Japanese shipping. This represented a complete reversal of everything submarine doctrine had emphasized. Despite focusing on Japan for decades as the probable enemy, American naval strategy had never envisioned using submarines to destroy merchant shipping on a massive scale. The doctrine transformed rapidly as commanding officers returned from patrols and filed their accounts. These reports, 50 to 60 pages each, became the foundation for an entirely new approach centered on aggression. Senior commanders reviewed them, adding assessments that encouraged or discouraged specific tactics. Over time, accumulated combat experience coalesced into formal doctrine, emphasizing offensive action and calculated risk-taking. The transformation extracted a terrible price. During 1942, nearly 30% of submarine commanding officers lost their commands due to insufficient aggression or failure to achieve meaningful results. The Navy hunted desperately for replacements who possessed both technical expertise and the psychological capacity to make calculated risks under fire. Samuel Dealey represented exactly the caliber of officer they needed. In September 1942, the Navy granted him command of USS Harder, a brand-new Gato-class submarine still under construction at Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut. USS Harder, hull number SS-257, received her commission on December 2, 1942, less than 1 year after Pearl Harbor. The Gato class represented the cutting edge of American submarine design. At 311 feet in length, with a 27-foot beam, these vessels displaced 1,525 tons on the surface and 2,424 tons when submerged. 4 diesel engines powered surface operations and charged batteries that drove electric motors for underwater movement. Top speed reached 20.5 knots on the surface, declining to 9 knots when submerged. The boats could dive to a test depth of 300 feet, though experienced commanders occasionally exceeded that limit during emergencies. Armament consisted of 10 21-inch torpedo tubes carrying 24 torpedoes total, supplemented by a 4-inch deck gun. Harder suffered from a critical mechanical vulnerability shared by 11 other Gato-class submarines. Troublesome Hoechst-Owens-Rentschler diesel engines, licensed from German manufacturer Maschinen Fabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg during the 1930s. The American version proved chronically unreliable, and this flaw haunted Harder throughout her entire operational life. Despite the engine problems, Dealey took his new command through shakedown exercises along the East Coast. After surviving a friendly fire incident from a Navy patrol bomber in the Caribbean, he brought his boat to the Pacific during spring 1943, arriving at Pearl Harbor prepared for combat operations. On June 7, 1943, USS Harder departed Pearl Harbor on her first war patrol, bound for the coast of southern Honshu. Late on the night of June 21st, Harder's sonar detected a 2-ship enemy convoy. Dealey maneuvered for attack using radar to approach on the surface and released 4 torpedoes at the targets. Then everything deteriorated. An aggressive Japanese escort detected the attack and launched an immediate counter-assault. Depth charges began exploding all around them. Dealey ordered emergency dive. Harder pitched downward, her steel hull groaning under mounting pressure. Then came the terrible grinding crunch. The submarine had been forced so deep that her nose struck the muddy bottom off the Japanese coast hard. For agonizing minutes, Harder remained trapped as depth charges continued erupting above them. Finally, Dealey managed to reverse his engines and pull free, slipping away into deeper water. It was an inauspicious beginning. That first terrifying encounter revealed profound truths about submarine warfare in 1943. Japanese escorts possessed both skill and aggressiveness in anti-submarine tactics. The ocean floor often sat shallower than American charts indicated. Destroyers and escort vessels represented the submarine's ultimate predator, something most commanding officers tried desperately to avoid. Conventional wisdom stated that submarines should evade destroyers whenever possible. These fast, maneuverable warships equipped with depth charges and sonar were specifically designed as submarine killers. Attacking a destroyer was considered extraordinarily risky, attempted only when absolutely necessary or when circumstances strongly favored the submarine. But Samuel Dealey reached different conclusions from that harrowing encounter. He had faced a destroyer at its most dangerous moment, yet Harder had survived and remained operational. 2 nights later, on June 23rd, Dealey achieved his first genuine success, putting a torpedo into the Japanese seaplane tender Sagara Maru, a 7,000-ton vessel that beached and was subsequently destroyed. Over the following 4 days, Dealey attempted 7 additional attacks against 3 different convoys. Post-war analysis credited him with possible damage to just 1 other vessel during these attempts. Harder returned to Midway Island on July 7, 1943, with one of her 4 diesel engines completely non-functional. After hasty repairs and loading spare engine components, Harder returned to sea for her second war patrol in late August, heading once more for Honshu. This patrol proved dramatically different. In just 14 days, Harder conducted 9 separate attacks, and post-war records credited Dealey with sinking 5 enemy ships, totaling 15,000 tons. The submarine attacked and destroyed Koyomaru on September 9th, racing past an escort vessel at just 1,200 yards without being detected. 2 days later, she sank the cargo ship Yokomaru. On September 13th, Japanese aircraft forced Harder deep beneath the surface. What followed tested both the submarine and her crew to their absolute limits. Japanese escorts kept Harder pinned down with a severe depth charge attack lasting over 2 days, nearly exhausting the boat's battery reserves. The crew endured repeated explosions, uncertain with each detonation whether it would rupture their hull and kill them all. Carbon dioxide accumulated, temperature climbed steadily, men fought against fear and claustrophobia, maintaining absolute silence to avoid revealing their position. Finally, Dealey located a thermal layer in the water that disrupted Japanese sonar and escaped. On September 19th, a torpedo sent Kaiosan Maru to the bottom. On September 23rd, off Nagoya Bay, she sank the 4,500-ton freighter Koyomaru and the 5,800-ton tanker Daishin Maru. With torpedoes expended, Harder turned homeward, arriving at Pearl Harbor on October 8, 1943. The second patrol had established Dealey's reputation for resolute action. 5 confirmed kills in 14 days represented outstanding performance. More significantly, Dealey had survived a sustained depth charge attack that would have broken many commanders psychologically. He had demonstrated the mental fortitude to endure extreme pressure and continue hunting relentlessly. At the end of October 1943, Commander Submarine Forces Pacific, Vice Admiral Charles Lockwood, ordered Harder to join USS Snook and USS Pargo, forming a coordinated attack group known as a Wolfpack for operations around the Mariana Islands. The 3 submarines departed on October 30th with orders to attack Japanese shipping in preparation for the American invasion of Tarawa. Early Wolfpack operations struggled with communication difficulties. After collaborating with Pargo in attacking an enemy freighter on November 12th with unclear results, Dealey found himself operating independently. On November 19th, Harder detected a convoy consisting of 3 large Japanese freighters with escorts north of the Marianas. Dealey maneuvered for attack and fired 10 torpedoes, scoring hits on 2 targets. Udo Maru sank. As depth charges began falling, Dealey pressed the attack, firing 2 additional torpedoes that destroyed Hoko Maru. Rather than withdrawing, Harder climbed to periscope depth after nightfall to pursue the 3rd merchant ship, the 6,000-ton Nikko Maru. The Japanese crew kept her afloat through heroic damage control, even as Dealey fired multiple additional torpedoes at the vessel. Rough seas the following day finally sent her to the bottom. Harder returned to Pearl Harbor on November 30th, then sailed to Mare Island Naval Shipyard for extensive overhaul. Returning to operations in the Pacific, Harder reached Pearl Harbor on February 27, 1944, and departed on her fourth war patrol on March 16th in company with USS Horse. The submarines received lifeguard duty, tasked with rescuing American aviators downed during airstrikes. On April 1st, 1944, during airstrikes against Woolley and the Caroline Islands, Harder received word of an injured pilot stranded on the beach of an enemy-held island west of Woolley. Protected by air cover, Dealey drove Harder against a reef and maintained position with both propellers while sending a rescue boat ashore through the breaking surf. The sniper fire erupting from the shoreline couldn't stop what needed to happen. Despite bullets whizzing past, the rescue mission pushed forward, and pilot Ensign John R. Galvin made it safely onto the deck. Yet what truly mattered happened 12 days later, when everything about how submarines fought destroyers changed forever. On April 13th, a Japanese reconnaissance plane spotted Harder steaming north of the Western Caroline Islands. Within minutes, the destroyer Ikazuchi received her coordinates and turned to intercept. The destroyer captain wasted no time. He swung his ship hard toward where Harder moved through the water, racing to close the distance until he could strike. It was the exact scenario that every submarine commander knew to fear and avoid. A destroyer had found them. Now it was charging straight at them. The textbook answer was simple. Dive deep, go silent, try to slip away into the darkness below. But Dealey chose something different that day, something that would alter how submarines hunted in the Pacific forever. He pointed Harder directly at the onrushing destroyer. To understand what happened next, you need to know about a tactic so bold, so completely against everything submariners learned, that almost nobody had the nerve to try it. The down-the-throat shot, they called it. The idea came from watching how destroyers behaved when they attacked. When a destroyer came charging at a submarine at full speed, it became a narrow target, yes, but it also locked itself into one course. The captain had to keep that heading to get close enough for a kill. That rigid path created a slim window of opportunity for a submarine commander with ice in his veins and perfect timing. Fire a tight cluster of torpedoes, each one separated by just a degree or two, and you could send them straight down the destroyer's throat. By the time the enemy lookouts spotted those torpedo trails racing toward them, they were too close to turn. The destroyer's own speed and commitment sealed everything. The tactic worked beautifully when visibility dropped, or when the range tightened and the enemy crew had almost no time to react. But it demanded flawless timing, perfect shooting solutions, and most of all, the psychological strength to hold your course toward an approaching warship instead of running. Most submarine commanders found that last part impossible. Everything in their bones screamed to dive, to escape, to hide. When Ikazuchi closed to 900 yards, Dealey fired 4 torpedoes straight at the charging ship. 5 minutes later, Ikazuchi slipped under the waves, her hull shattered by multiple hits. Dealey's report to headquarters spread through the submarine fleet like wildfire. 4 torpedoes expended, 1 Japanese destroyer. It broke every rule that had governed submarine warfare. Dealey hadn't just survived a destroyer attack, he'd done something far bolder. He'd hunted that destroyer using a method that would soon spread across every submarine in the Pacific. 4 days after Ikazuchi went down, Harder sank the 7,000-ton merchant vessel Matsu Emaru and damaged an escort vessel. Then, to cap off the patrol, she surfaced on April 20th and unleashed gunfire at an enemy garrison on shore, doing it under cover of a driving rainstorm. When the 4th patrol ended at Fremantle Submarine Base in Western Australia on May 3, 1944, Dealey could look back at what he'd accomplished. He'd destroyed a destroyer using a revolutionary tactic, pulled a pilot from the water under enemy fire, sunk a transport ship, damaged an escort, and bombarded an enemy position. But what came next would demand even more from him and his crew. Even greater risks waited just ahead. Back in the war rooms of Pearl Harbor, American strategists had been doing their calculations. Ultra-code breaking had shown them something that changed everything. The Imperial Japanese Navy had been bleeding destroyers at an alarming rate around the Solomon Islands. Suddenly, Japan faced a crisis. They needed those destroyers now more than ever to protect their merchant convoys and screen their remaining carriers. Destroyers that commanders once considered secondary targets suddenly jumped to the top of the priority list. The order came down from Commander Submarines Pacific. Hunt destroyers. Hunt them deliberately. Every Japanese destroyer resting on the ocean floor meant one fewer escort for their convoys, one fewer shield for their fleet carriers, one fewer submarine hunter to worry about. Seeing this shift, Dilley pushed for a specific hunting ground: the waters around Tawi-Tawi, where the Japanese fleet anchored off the northeast coast of Borneo. The logic was straightforward. Tawi-Tawi sat close to Borneo's oil fields, letting Japanese warships refuel right there instead of making the increasingly perilous voyage back home. American submarines had already strangled Japan's oil supply so thoroughly that the fleet had nowhere else to go. Ultra-intelligence showed that Japan had concentrated serious naval power at Tawi-Tawi, including destroyers guarding the anchorage. It was a hunter's dream, destroyers packed together, waiting to be hunted. On May 26, 1944, Harder left Fremantle alongside USS Redfin, heading for the patrol area. The 5th War Patrol would become the most storied submarine mission of the entire war. But first came a special assignment: infiltrate through the heavily guarded straits and retrieve Australian commandos and Allied intelligence officers from Borneo's coast. On the night of June 6, 1944, Harder threaded her way through the Sibutu Passage between Tawi-Tawi and Borneo. The passage was tight, dangerous, constantly watched. It was one of the most treacherous spots in the entire Pacific for any submarine. At 19:30 hours, Dilley's radar picked up 3 tankers, with 2 destroyers escorting them. He brought Harder to the surface and used her speed advantage to get ahead of them. But the moon hung bright and full, illuminating Harder like a spotlight, and the destroyer Mintsuki saw her. The enemy destroyer swung hard toward Harder and charged. Dilley submerged instantly. At 21:59 hours, from 1,100 yards out, he fired 3 torpedoes directly at the approaching warship. 2 found their mark. The destroyer heaved up from the sea and broke apart, sinking in less than 5 minutes. Just 45 of her crew survived. Less than 20 minutes passed before Harder's radar screamed an alarm. Another destroyer was racing toward them from 14,000 yards away. Everything said run, dive deep, disappear. Dilley did the opposite. He turned toward the enemy and began closing the distance, waiting until the range dropped to just 1,250 yards before releasing all 6 bow torpedoes at 2,242 hours. This Japanese captain knew what he was doing. He twisted his ship hard and avoided every single torpedo. Harder dove to 400 feet and braced for what came next. Depth charges thundered down. A thermal layer in the water helped Harder fade into the depths. The pursuit kept going until midnight, but Harder escaped. The encounter proved an important lesson. The tactic worked best when visibility was poor or when a destroyer was completely committed to its attack. In clear conditions, when an enemy captain had room to maneuver, he could slip away. Still, Harder had a mission waiting. The night of June 7th, at 1940 hours, Dilley brought Harder to the surface and headed toward the Borneo coast. The submarine crept forward until her hull scraped bottom in just 6,000 yards of water off the beach. 2 Australian commandos, Major William T. Jenkins and Sergeant Stanley W. Dodds, assembled their folding canoes and paddled toward shore while Harder guided them by radar through walkie-talkies. 2 hours later, they returned with 6 members of the Australian Special Reconnaissance Department's Z Unit at 00:30 hours on June 8th. That same evening, as Harder moved back through the Sibutu Passage, lookouts spotted 2 enemy destroyers patrolling the narrowest section, just 6 miles from the fleet anchorage. The destroyers ran side by side, a textbook pattern designed to maximize their sonar sweep. Dilley took Harder down and approached unseen. At 1,000 yards, he fired 4 torpedoes at the overlapping targets. The second and third torpedoes ripped into the destroyer Tanikaze. She sank almost immediately, her boilers igniting in an enormous explosion that shockwaved through Harder's hull. The 4th torpedo slammed into what appeared to be the second destroyer with a blinding flash. Both ships vanished beneath the surface within minutes. Depth charges started falling as enemy aircraft arrived overhead. Dilley took Harder deep and turned south toward the main anchorage for reconnaissance. Japanese records after the war confirmed Tanikaze's sinking. American observers saw the explosion and watched what appeared to be a second destroyer disappear. though post-war Japanese records didn't definitively confirm that second target. In just 2 days, Harder had sunk at least 2 destroyers for certain, possibly 3, picked up Allied commandos, and pushed deep into the Japanese fleet's heavily defended perimeter. But the patrol was just beginning. On the afternoon of June 10, 1944, Harder's periscope spotted a massive Japanese task force. 3 battleships, 4 cruisers, screening destroyers spread across the horizon. This was Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's striking force, assembled for Operation Argo, the decisive battle Japan was planning against American forces in the Philippine Sea. A patrol aircraft spotted Harder at periscope depth and radioed the escort ships. 1 destroyer peeled away and raced toward Harder at 35 knots. The destroyer captain meant to force Harder down, mark her position with depth charges, and let the task force escape while other escorts finished the job. The range narrowed rapidly, 1,500 yards, 1,400, 1,300. At 1,200 yards, Dilley fired 3 torpedoes and ordered the crash dive. The solution had to be perfect. Fire too early and the torpedoes would pass ahead of the destroyer. Fire too late and the destroyer would be too close for the warheads to arm. Dilley's instincts were flawless. As Harder descended, the torpedoes raced toward their target. 55 seconds ticked past as the first torpedo covered the distance. During those same seconds, Harder had traveled to a spot almost directly beneath the destroyer. The explosion erupted right above them. The concussion heeled Harder over on her side, shockwaves tore through the hull, light bulbs burst, men crashed against the bulkheads. Dilley had passed so close under the dying destroyer that pieces of the enemy ship rained down on Harder's deck. The crew heard metal screaming above them, bulkheads tearing, equipment smashing, hull sections separating as the destroyer broke into pieces. Hours afterward, Japanese escorts hunted Harder with depth charges, but Dilley had already radioed Pearl Harbor with the enemy fleet's position. That contact report would change what happened next. When Harder finally surfaced that night to recharge batteries, Dilley and his crew were shot through with exhaustion. The patrol logs would note later that fatigue approached dangerous levels more than once. On June 11th, Harder conducted another reconnaissance run on the Tawi-Tawi anchorage and spotted more enemy cruisers and destroyers preparing for Operation Ago. At 1600 hours, Dilley headed for open ocean, and that night transmitted what he'd seen to Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet. The intelligence proved absolutely crucial as American forces prepared for what would become the Battle of the Philippine Sea. During those 5 remarkable days from June 6th to June 10th, Harder had engaged Japanese destroyers in 5 separate attacks, sinking at least 3 confirmed, possibly more. Dilley would receive the Medal of Honor for this patrol. The citation credited him with destroying 5 destroyers in 5 close-range torpedo engagements, though post-war efforts to verify every sinking faced obstacles because Japanese records were incomplete or had been destroyed. Multiple sources backed up the claims: American observations, Japanese reports, accounts from survivors, all suggesting multiple destroyer kills during this stretch. The patrol's significance went beyond the ships themselves. Admiral Sumu Toyoda, commander of the Japanese Combined Fleet, received report after report of destroyers sinking one after another. The aggressive contacts suggested submarines had broken through Tawi-Tawi's defenses. The loss of several destroyers convinced Toyoda the anchorage was no longer safe. On June 13, 1944, Toyoda ordered his mobile fleet to depart Tawi-Tawi immediately, a full day ahead of schedule. This early departure scrambled Japan's plans for Operation Ago. The carriers left before preparations were finished. Coordination with land-based aircraft fell apart. Most critically, Ozawa's force had to slow down in the Philippine Sea to let trailing units catch up, losing precious hours to get into position before the battle began. When the Battle of the Philippine Sea opened on June 19 and 20, 1944, American forces won a crushing victory. The scale of destruction that unfolded across the Philippine Sea left no doubt about American naval dominance. Carrier pilots and anti-aircraft gunners claimed nearly 480 Japanese aircraft in the engagement that aviators would forever remember as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Beyond the skies, American submarines delivered their own devastating blows to enemy surface forces. USS Albacore struck the fleet carrier Taiho with a spread of torpedoes that sealed its fate. USS Kavala found and sank the Shokaku. Carrier aircraft finished the Heiho. What had once been Japan's proud carrier aviation arm, already diminished by earlier campaigns, lay in ruins. The Japanese could no longer project air power across vast ocean distances. Their carrier operations, the cornerstone of Pacific naval strategy, had been shattered beyond recovery. The war's remaining years would see no large-scale carrier battles initiated by Japan because Japan could no longer field them. Multiple elements had converged to produce this victory, and one submarine's relentless operations deserved particular recognition. USS Harda's patrols around Taui Taui had rattled Japanese command structure far more than initial reports suggested. When Admiral Toyoda ordered the fleet's premature withdrawal, disrupting the carefully orchestrated Operation AGO, the submarine threat factored heavily into his thinking. Japanese destroyers had been sunk. Japanese officers believed submarines prowled in numbers around the anchorage, creating an invisible cordon of danger. One persistent submarine had influenced decisions made at the fleet commander level, shifting the entire trajectory of a major naval engagement. Harda steamed southward toward Darwin, Australia, arriving on June 21st to replenish her torpedo magazines. After additional patrols through the Flores Sea, she returned to port on July 3rd, her mission accomplished, but her greatest trials still ahead. Recognition arrived swiftly. General Douglas MacArthur himself presented Commander Samuel Dealey with the Distinguished Service Cross, the Army's second highest award for valor. That honor, though profound, became merely the prelude. Dealey received the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, a recognition reserved for extraordinary sacrifice and heroism. The citation spoke of his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his own life while commanding USS Harda during her fifth war patrol in Japanese-controlled waters. His remarkable achievement stood undeniable. 5 Japanese destroyers sunk in 5 separate short-range torpedo attacks, each one executed with precision and nerve. The citation captured the essence of his command, describing the valiant fighting spirit of Commander Dealey and his indomitable crew. The entire ship's complement received the Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism in combat. Harda had earned a motto that would echo through submarine history: "Hit them harder." August 5, 1944, marked the beginning of her final chapter. Harda departed Fremantle, Western Australia, leading a wolf pack of 3 submarines into the most dangerous waters yet. USS Haddock sailed alongside under the command of Chester Nimitz, Jr., son of the Pacific Fleet's commanding admiral. USS Hake completed the trio, commanded by Frank Haler. Their orders were clear: seek and destroy Japanese shipping off the Philippines' west coast, south of Luzon Strait. Intelligence reports indicated that Japanese convoy H-171 had sought refuge in Palawan Bay, near northern Mindoro. The submarine force already operating in the area welcomed the reinforcements. Dealey, as senior officer present, assumed tactical command of the enlarged pack. On August 21st, as the Japanese convoy sortied from Palawan Bay at 05:45 hours, the coordinated attack commenced with surgical precision. 4 merchant vessels totaling 22,400 tons exploded into flame and sank beneath the tropical waters. The next morning brought fresh opportunities. Harda and Haddock coordinated another strike, their torpedoes finding the escort vessels Matsu and Hibari, coastal defense ships that shepherded the convoy. Both went down. By that evening, Hake rejoined the pack. Dawn on August 23rd brought another success. Haddock attacked and crippled the destroyer Asakaze off Cape Bolinao. With her torpedo tubes empty, Haddock turned away toward Biak to resupply, leaving Harda and Hake to continue the hunt through treacherous waters where Japanese patrols grew increasingly desperate. 2 days later, August 24th, before sunrise painted the sky, Hake's radar swept across the Philippine waters and detected 2 vessels moving out from Dasol Bay. An older destroyer and an escort frigate, CD-22, appeared on the scope. The destroyer immediately retreated into the bay's protection, but CD-22 continued outward on patrol, alone and isolated. Frank Haler ordered Hake into an approach vector, calculating angles and distances. Something about the tactical situation troubled him. The geometry felt wrong, the positioning disadvantageous. He signaled his intentions to break off contact and reposition. As Haler maneuvered his submarine away, something caught his attention at 6:47 hours. A periscope broke the surface. Another submarine moved in the same confined waters. Harder was also here, hunting the same prey. Both boats now operated in proximity, creating a dangerous dance where any error could prove fatal. The escort ship CD-22, with its sensitive sonar, likely detected at least one of the American submarines. At 0710 hours, Haler understood the tactical picture had shifted. Two submarines were now in play. The escort appeared confused about which target to engage first. The situation spiraled into complexity and peril. At 0728 hours, Haler and his entire crew heard the unmistakable roar of depth charges erupting above them. 15 charges detonated in rapid succession, the acoustic signature unmistakable. Harder had made her move. Dealey had executed the approach that had succeeded repeatedly during earlier patrols. He had positioned Harder carefully, calculated the firing solution with precision, and released his torpedoes. But fate intervened. The weapons diverged from their intended path. Two shot wide to port, the third streaked wide to starboard. Whether Dealey had misjudged the range, whether CD-22's captain sensed danger and twisted his ship at the crucial instant, whether some mechanical flaw scattered the torpedo spread, the truth remained lost to the sea. What mattered was the outcome. CD-22 survived, and the Japanese escort immediately counterattacked with ferocity. 15 depth charges erupted in a concentrated pattern directly above Harder's position. The detonations struck at her depth. The explosions compressed the water with terrible force, and Harder's hull crumpled inward. The pressure vessel that protected her crew fractured under stresses it could not withstand. USS Harder, submarine number 2157, descended into darkness, carrying all 79 men to their deaths. Commander Samuel Dealey died at age 37, having commanded Harder throughout all 6 of her war patrols. The shock reverberated through the submarine force with profound impact. Some officers believed Dealey had finally exhausted his share of luck after navigating so many perilous situations. Others wondered if he had crossed an invisible threshold between calculated boldness and recklessness that invited disaster. Decades would pass before historians and submarine veterans could discuss his loss without emotional turbulence. Had the aggressive direct engagement that worked against fleet destroyers proved ineffective against a smaller, more agile escort vessel? Had months of relentless combat degraded his judgment, dulled his reflexes, or clouded his timing? Had the escort's captain simply executed the correct defensive maneuver at precisely the right moment? The answer almost certainly encompassed all these elements. Direct engagement tactics carried no guarantee of success. They demanded optimal conditions, split-second timing, and circumstances aligned in the attacker's favor. Dealey had succeeded repeatedly through mastery and fortune combined. On August 24, 1944, those elements failed to align. Yet focusing solely on Harder's final moments obscures the revolutionary impact of Dealey's 21 months in command. When Dealey assumed the captain's chair in December 1942, American submarine doctrine held destroyers as apex predators and submarines as vulnerable prey. Standard procedure called for immediate crash dives and evasion at maximum depth when a destroyer approached. Dealey rejected this passive defensive approach not through intellectual argument but through combat demonstration. He recognized a critical vulnerability in destroyer tactics. When destroyers committed to attack, they followed predictable courses during those precious seconds of maximum vulnerability. Their own aggression created the very opening an audacious submarine commander could exploit. Precise timing and steady nerves could enable a submarine to launch torpedoes directly at the charging destroyer before submerging beneath it to safety. Between April and June 1944, Dealey proved the concept's validity by sinking multiple Japanese destroyers using exactly this method. he fundamentally altered how submarine commanders throughout the Pacific Fleet approached encounters with their most dangerous surface opponent. Other submarines began adopting similar aggressive tactics. The psychological implications cut across both navies. Japanese destroyer captains who had hunted submarines with confidence now faced the terrifying possibility that their prey might strike back instead of fleeing. Aggressive pursuit became measured and cautious. Destroyers lost their predatory edge. The entire calculus of anti-submarine warfare shifted. American submarine commanders, meanwhile, gained confidence that destroyers could be engaged and defeated. The strategic reverberations extended far beyond individual ship sinkings. Dealey's operations around Tawi had persuaded Admiral Toyoda to order the fleet's premature withdrawal, disrupting Operation AGO and contributing materially to American victory at the Philippine Sea. A single submarine's sustained operations had altered outcomes at the fleet level. This represented submarine warfare operating at strategic effect. Across 6 war patrols, Harder sank 16 enemy vessels totaling 54,000 tons, according to official post-war accounting. This achievement ranked Dealey among the war's 5 highest-scoring submarine commanders. More significantly, Harder claimed 4 confirmed fleet destroyers plus 2 coastal defense vessels, making her the American submarine that sank the most enemy warships. 6 battle stars adorned her records, and the Presidential Unit Citation recognized her contributions across all 6 patrols. Yet statistics alone failed to capture the revolutionary shift in submarine tactics that Dealey had catalyzed. Before Dealey, submarines avoided destroyers. After Dealey, submarines hunted destroyers. The direct engagement method became standard doctrine taught throughout the submarine service. Information spread through patrol reports, tactical discussions, and personal communications between captains. Other commanders executed successful attacks throughout 1944 and 1945. Japanese destroyer forces never fully recovered from the mounting casualties inflicted by American submarines during the war's final phases. The broader impact of American submarines on the Pacific War proved staggering. Submarines destroyed 1,314 enemy vessels, totaling 5.3 million tons, representing 55% of all Japanese ships lost during the entire conflict. This underwater campaign strangled Japan's war economy by severing supply lines connecting the home islands to essential resource areas. Submarines hunted and killed Japanese combat vessels, including carriers, battleships, and cruisers. They conducted reconnaissance missions, rescued downed aviators, inserted special operations teams, and gathered critical intelligence. Admiral William Halsey, commanding the Third Fleet, later reflected on the Pacific War's decisive instruments with remarkable clarity. Asked to rank what mattered most, Halsey replied without hesitation: submarines first, radar second, aircraft third, bulldozers fourth. American submarines had earned that preeminent position through relentless operations pioneered by commanders like Samuel Dealey. The silent service transformed from cautious scouts into an offensive force that Japanese shipping could neither evade nor adequately defend against. 80 years after her loss, in May 2024, the Lost 52 project announced the discovery of Harder's wreck in the South China Sea, near Luzon, resting at depths exceeding 3,000 feet. Underwater imagery revealed the hull remains relatively intact, except for the catastrophic damage aft of the conning tower, where CD-22's depth charges had struck the fatal blow. Dealey's tactical innovations extended beyond any individual submarine or captain. His method demonstrated that submarines need not remain passive targets awaiting the perfect moment to flee from destroyers. Direct engagement could succeed when conditions permitted. This expansion of tactical options represented Dealey's most enduring contribution to submarine warfare doctrine. He did not eliminate the destroyer threat or transform submarine operations into a safe endeavor. Rather, he proved that resolute action could produce results. That direct engagement offered genuine possibilities. That submarines possessed capabilities never envisioned in pre-war doctrine. Japanese destroyer forces throughout the Pacific operated under increasing caution during 1944 and 1945. Submarine commanders understood that American boats might attack rather than evade. Charging a detected submarine now carried risks beyond traditional anti-submarine considerations. This psychological transformation degraded destroyer effectiveness even in encounters that never resulted in combat. The mere possibility that a submarine might counterattack altered destroyer behavior patterns fundamentally. American submarines gained operational freedom as Japanese destroyers became more hesitant in their pursuit. Convoys traveled with fewer escorts because destroyer losses mounted faster than replacements could be constructed. Fleet operations suffered from inadequate screening. The cumulative effect of persistent American submarine operations, particularly the destroyer hunting tactics that Dealey exemplified, weakened Japanese naval capabilities across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Samuel Dealey commanded USS Harder for 6 war patrols spanning 21 months of relentless combat. He sank 16 enemy ships and engaged multiple destroyers, employing methods that revolutionized submarine warfare. He received America's highest military decorations, including the Medal of Honor. His intelligence gathering and enemy disruption influenced major fleet operations. He altered how submarine warfare would be conducted in the Pacific for the war's remainder. On August 24, 1944, at age 37, he died attempting one final attack when an approach that had worked countless times before encountered circumstances beyond even his skill to overcome. USS Harder rests 3,000 feet beneath the Philippine Sea, a monument to achievement and sacrifice combined. Her crew lies alongside the submarine they made legendary through 6 war patrols of unrelenting combat operations. Their legacy endures in the tactical doctrine that permeated the submarine service and in the unwavering spirit that strangled Japanese naval power and contributed decisively to Allied victory in the Pacific. The destroyer killer's head-on attacks fundamentally transformed American submarine warfare through combat innovation that validated an entirely new approach, spread through shared experience among the fleet, and influenced submarine operations throughout the Pacific until the war's end. Revolution emerged not from academic planning, but from repeated success against enemy destroyers, changing both tactical doctrine and the psychological equilibrium between submarines and their most formidable opponent.